Alright everyone, it's time for Vermont Issues, episode 17, Generac flees high-tax state of Vermont. This is a microcosm of a much larger problem within our state. Now, the fleeing of this one business from our high-tax workers' utopia to a lower tax state, which funnily enough is Wisconsin, which itself is fairly high cost of living, it's a symbol of a larger problem in that Phil Scott, our governor, he's trying to market our state as, oh, it's a place to do business. Let's have a multi-million-dollar ad campaign that the taxpayers have to pay for. The funny part is that if you just lowered the tax rates in the state, got rid of some of the regulatory burden, and shifted some of your spending towards making our infrastructure work so people could actually get around and do business so that those trucks can go somewhere other than fucking White River Junction or Burlington, you probably wouldn't have this problem with businesses leaving. And it's not just businesses, it's people too. Like if somebody wants the rustic appeal of northern New England, they're going to go to New Hampshire. They're not going to come to Vermont. They'll come to Vermont to be tourists. They'll come to drink some syrup and eat a donut or something like that. And then they'll leave. They'll go skiing and then they'll leave. You're not creating any real jobs in the state of Vermont that aren't part of the service industry or part of the green energy business, and trust me, other states are going to get on board with that, and all the firms that we've got cropping up in the state, they're going to go out of business. They're going to get outcompeted by people in Texas and in the Mid-Atlantic and in the Pacific Northwest. Hell, they'll probably get outcompeted by Illinois, and we're going to be the next Illinois. We're going to go bankrupt. We're going to go broke as a state because of the shitty policies of Montpelier. That's what's going to happen. We're one fairly mild recession away from that already happening. You remember what happened with that and all the problems that we had, and there were empty homes everywhere, and the mall took a hit, and your downtown looked like shit, generally speaking. Some of them still haven't recovered. Rutland was lucky because, you know, because the mall completely flatlined and is no longer even functional, there was no choice but for the downtown to recover because people still have to get cheap goods somewhere, have to lower the rent a little bit. There are so many problems in this state, and it's a symbol of this. Everybody in the state government seems to want to look backwards at the glorious shining past of Vermont and say everything in the state is going to be a historical site. And we've got to keep everything small. We've got to think small. We've got to be, you know, small and rustic in every possible way so that we don't even really have a functioning metro area other than Burlington. That's what they want. They want it to be scenic and clean. You can have scenic and clean while having enough infrastructure and a low enough regulatory burden to at least compete with New Hampshire and Massachusetts and upstate New York. We can at least accomplish this. There is a great deal of very clean, very happy, rustic nature and small-town America in other parts of the country, including in Texas, where there is no personal income tax, where, community by community, property tax, lower. Cost of living, lower. Infrastructure, enormous compared to ours. How are they paying for this? They're a low tax state. They're making do somehow. Maybe it's because they have a pro-business model so they don't get completely screwed. Now, they have image problems, too. You know, we suppress billboards here, which is one of the few sort of pro-rustic things we do that makes sense. Nobody wants to look at that shit. It's not like, again, you go through New York, even in the countryside, yeah, there's a lot of billboards and shit like that. Okay, keep that out of the state, maybe. But don't market Vermont as a place to do business if you're not going to follow through and make it one. It's not going to work. So Generac says these 67 jobs are being cut. We're going back to Wisconsin because it's cheaper. They can make it. They can say anything they want about why they're doing it. It's because it's cheaper. It's a low-tax Wisconsin, if you can believe that. Everyone in the country practically wants to move to Texas at this point. Texas or a few other states that are still pro-business. That's where all the economic growth is happening. Our economic growth, it comes from tourism. Oh, more service industry jobs. The native population gets minimum wage or something close to it, and they can't even afford the touristy goods that people are coming into the state to consume. And then the state throws them welfare crumbs like it's some great show of generosity when that's coming from the few productive jobs left in the state. As your income begins to climb, if you are making ends meet, you start thinking about leaving the state. People who do well in college, they generally leave the state. If they manage to become a teacher, or they manage to become a nurse or a doctor or something, then they can stay. They can afford the cost of living. Most people aren't so lucky. They're not going to find a position in the state. They're going to go work on an oil rig or something like that. If they're going to start a business, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to start it in Vermont. New Hampshire, maybe if they want to stay semi-local and commute or something. That's what they'll do. I know I've thought about it many times. As my income rises and I realize how high the in-state income tax really is, I'm like, why should I be giving the state thousands of dollars for the benefit of using pothole-filled roads and enjoying 3 months of good weather out of the year? With a high cost of living, meaning, hey, even if you're making ends meet, you're still getting screwed by the sales tax alone. Why do I mean, if I want to stay in rustic northern New England, why don't I just go to New Hampshire? And if I want, like, really low tax, why don't I go back to Texas or something like that? Why the fuck should I stay in Vermont? That's what I've started to think about myself. I have my own personal reasons for waiting and seeing what happens. But I mean, come on, it's not a state to do business in. Quite clearly, you got businesses leaving the state left and right. Some business crops up, lasts a year, maybe 2 years, sometimes less than a year, and then it moves. And it tries this a couple times, and then it goes belly up. And it goes to another state if they have the money to do so. I can remember, for instance, classic tale of how this state works. The Kong Chow restaurant here in Rutland, which has been replaced by the totally unrelated, but still good, but not as good, but still good, Kong Chow Fusion, same building and so forth. Kong Chow restaurant's been around since the early 1900s, run by the same family. It basically is a historic site. They're still using the same decorations they had back in like the Depression or something. Really good food, by the way. I was personally familiar with the family that ran it. They were nice people. And they got screwed. The rent rose in the building. They said, well, we're already operating with Vermont's taxes. We're already operating on a shoestring budget. We can't fucking deal with this. They tried, people in the community, they tried to save them. They tried to say, can't the state do something about this so they're not getting, rent raised out of this building? And they said, well, there's nothing we can do about it. I'm sorry. Every other historical site, if it's useless, if it's some dilapidated round barn sitting in a field that 2 tourists looked at last year, we have to protect it at all costs. But if it's a functioning business that locals actually use, fuck them. We don't care if they're in their location. So they went up to the southern end of Burlington. I think they lasted 6 months. Because, of course, it's a huge investment. And the cost up there is even higher than it is in Rutland. I think they figured, hey, if we go to the larger metro area, we'll do well. Well, unfortunately, people up there don't know about your prestige as a business. People here did, and the state said, screw them. And that's what happened. And so now they went belly up. They don't exist anymore. All those, their entire life's work, after, I think, 3 generations of continuous ownership, totally gone in a few short months. The state came in, and they treated them like dirt because the building that they were in wasn't useless, because their business wasn't some cottage industry or something like that. They didn't have an alpaca herd or something like that. They got taxed out because the state's tax rate is so high that they have to raise the rent constantly. And that's what happened. And so now you've got a new restaurant there. It's good, but it's not the same people who own it. It's not the same exact food that's being served. It's not the same atmosphere. It's been modernized or something. It doesn't make any sense. And so now you've got another business. After screwing over people that were already there for, almost 100 fucking years, they get screwed people, I guess the Kong Chow Fusion must do okay enough because they're still there like half a decade later, but I mean, come on, this is how the state operates. Oh yeah, screw off. You're not in a barn. You're not selling weed, you're not in a barn, and you don't have anything to do with the maple industry, so, who cares? We're not going to protect you at all. We're going to keep upping the fucking tax rate and the regulatory burden so that people have to raise the rent. Hopefully that gets rid of all the local businesses. Then some out-of-stater with a lot of money can come in, pretend to be a local business. They'll have a big maple leaf on their sign. They'll have a logo that says Made in Vermont and all these other wonderful things. And they'll be the ones exploiting the tourist industry. It won't be Vermonters doing that. No, most of the Vermonters that have ever existed aren't even in Vermont at this point, I think. I think a lot of them moved off. I think a lot of them now are in New Hampshire or Texas, honestly. That's a sad state of our state right now. Phil Scott's not going to do anything to stop it, by the way. I completely condemn him, and I wish he'd get forced out of office. I hope he gets kicked out, honestly. I hope he's gone after one term. He deserves it. Just like Peter Shumlin did. Shumlin was an idiot. Last time we had sane leadership, I think it was early in the Bush administration. We've had a pair of lame-ass governors in a row. Phil Scott's lame. I voted for him because the alternative was worse, but I wanted Listman to be the candidate. He probably would have done a marginally better job. Wouldn't have been great, maybe, but he would have been better. Phil Scott was chosen because it was sort of the swing of the pendulum standard Vermont Republican, which is to say a Democrat. And that's why he's in power there. And he's just a fruitcake. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's too busy racing stock cars, talking about how pot's a gateway drug or some bullshit like that. Is this really what we need for leadership in this state? Or do we need someone who's going to come in and say, oh, I think we need a drastic overhaul. It's possible to have the maple trees and the rustic side roads and clean air. Other states have shown it's possible to do that without completely screwing the entire native population. You can actually do that. It's possible for these things to coexist. Again, look at New Hampshire. Lower cost of living, still high nationally, but they're capable of competing at least regionally. We're not. New Hampshire will steal every job that we have. We should be at least trying to compete with them. But instead, we're like, screw competition. We just want to be backwards. We want to live in the 1800s. The tourists come in, they expect the Wi-Fi and modernity, but they're not the native population should live in dirt-floored shacks with dial-up because it's all they're going to be able to afford. That's essentially what they want. That's about all. Peace out.